Who knows what this is? What is it? Onion. Has anyone ever cut into an onion before? Yeah? So if you cut into an onion, what do you find? Layers. Oh, you guys are good. Nobody's tired this morning. So onions have layers, one built on top of the other. And that's just how our stories of springtime that we're going to be sharing this morning are. Each story is built on stories and traditions that came before it until we come to our present day and how we celebrate this day. So the big story behind all of this begins way back before recorded history, when early humans realized that each year, as they were getting really nervous about it being cold and wintry, that they would be sure that winter would come again and spring with all of its new life would come again. And in many places, people gave special significance to the two equinoxes, the times when the sun crosses the plane of the Earth's equator, making night and day about the same length all over the Earth. And we have one equinox in the fall and one equinox in the spring. And our spring or vernal equinox usually falls somewhere between March 19th and March 22nd. And this special time, the equinox, was recognized all over the world as a time of renewal and rebirth. This was a time to celebrate the symbolic resurrection, that means things coming alive again, of the earth itself, and as we'll see, was changed and adapted by many people in many different places with many ways of expressing this same big story. But it's important to understand that all of the stories really grew out of this very human big story of how our earth reawakens again each year, this time of year, to spring this life-giving, life-affirming time. There are many stories of springtime, and today we're just going to share a few of them with you. So everybody settle in for our first story.
I'm Holly, and I'm going to share our first story with you today. Our first story, the story of the goddess Ostara, is actually based on even older stories. Remember the layers of the onion? A long, long time ago, in a place called Babylon, people were telling versions of the big story of the renewal of the earth. In this place and time, the story took the form of stories of the goddess Ishtar. These stories of Ishtar's descent to the underworld and her resurrection that follows are contained in the oldest writings that have ever been discovered. That Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, and the story of Gilgamesh. Scholars believe that they were based on the oral mythology of the region and were recorded about 2100 BCE, before the Common Era. Many years later, but still a very long time ago, in a different part of the world, we have the story of the goddess Ostara, which has many similarities to the story of the goddess Ishtar. The story of Ostara comes from what is now Europe. This Saxon goddess, Ostara, is a goddess of the dawn and the spring, and her name derives from words for the dawn or sunrise when the light comes from the east. It is thought that our name for Easter derives from the name of this goddess. Ostara was a fertility goddess, bringing in the end of winter and the days brighter and growing longer after the spring equinox. Ostara had a passion for new life. Her presence was felt in the flowering of plants and the birth of babies, both human and animal. The rabbit was her sacred animal, Eggs and rabbits both featured in the spring festivals of Ostara. Eggs are symbols of fertility, and the newborn chicks a representation of new growth. Brightly colored eggs, chicks, and bunnies were all used at festival time to express appreciation for Ostara's gifts of abundance. Wiccans and other modern-day pagans continued to celebrate the spring equinox as one of their 8 yearly holy days of celebration. Nearer to the equator, where the sun is stronger, this is a time of sprouting of the summer's crop, while farther north it is a time for seeding. These modern-day rituals at the spring equinox are related to the fertility of the crops and to the balance of the day and night times. So in the story of Ostara, which was layered onto the story of Ishtar, we have many of the same human impulses and themes that are common in this time of the year. One of the parts of celebrating this time of year includes the concept of abundance, of sharing what we have out of knowing that we have plenty. Each week, our congregation shares from our abundance with the children and families of Goleta Head Start. Today, in the special spirit of the Goddess of Ostara, let us bring forward our gifts of food as we sing "From You I Receive."
Hi, I'm William, and I'm going to share our second story with you today. This is the story of Demeter and Persephone, and it comes to us from the ancient Greeks. As you listen, see if you can find some of the same ideas that we heard in our previous story of Ostara. Zeus, the king of all the gods, had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Each had an important job. His sister Demeter was in charge of the harvest. If Demeter did not do her job, the crops would die and everyone would starve. It was important to keep Demeter happy. Everyone helped out with that, both gods and mortals. It was that important. Demeter loved her daughter Persephone. They played together in the fields almost every day. As Persephone smiled at her mother, Demeter's heart swelled with happiness, and the crops grew high and healthy. Flowers tumbled everywhere. As time passed, Persephone grew into a lovely goddess. And that's when the trouble started. Hades, the king of the underworld, was a gloomy fellow, and he normally stayed in the underworld. But one day, Hades felt restless. He decided to take his 3-headed dog out for a chariot ride. Cerberus, his dog, usually stood guard at the gate to the underworld. But Hades gave his pup a break now and then. He scooped up Cerberus and left a couple of spirits in charge instead. Hades flew his chariot up to earth. Cerberus leapt out of the chariot and ran around, sniffing flowers with all 3 of his heads. The dog ran up to a lovely young woman, the goddess Persephone. Some people might have been startled if a 3-headed dog came tearing up, but Persephone only laughed and scratched his heads. Hades loved that old dog. He watched his dog playing happily with Persephone. He heard Persephone's delighted laugh. Hades fell deeply in love. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed Persephone, his dog, and his chariot, and dove deep into the darkest depths of the underworld. Hades locked Persephone in a beautifully decorated room in the hall of Hades. He brought her all kinds of delicious food, but Persephone refused to eat. She had heard that if you ate anything in Hades, you could never leave. She had every intention of leaving as soon as she could figure out how to do so. Over a week went by. Finally, in desperate hunger, Persephone ate 6 pomegranate seeds, and she promptly burst into tears. And she was not the only one crying. Demeter, her mother, missed her daughter terribly. She didn't care if the crops died. She didn't care about anything except finding her daughter. No one knows who told Zeus about it, but it was clear this could not go on. Zeus sent his son Hermes to work a deal with Hades. This was the deal that Hermes worked out. If Persephone would marry Hades, she would live as queen of the underworld for 6 months each winter. In the spring, Persephone would return to Earth and live there for 6 months. No one especially liked the deal, but everyone finally agreed. So, as the story goes, Demeter makes sure flowers are blooming and crops are growing and the fields are green with welcome. Every fall, when Persephone returns to the underworld, Demeter ignores the crops and flowers and lets them die. But each spring, Demeter brings everything to life again, ready to welcome her daughter's return.
So how many of you heard some of the same ideas in the second story as you did in the first story? Oh, good. We have a couple people who were attentive. Everyone else heard them, but are just not raising their hands.
And I'm going to share our third story with you. This story is about a man named Jesus and is told in the Christian Bible. For many people who are Christians, this is a story of Jesus' death and resurrection that's coming alive again. As you listen, see if you can find the same ideas or some of them that you've heard in the previous stories. Jesus was a Jewish man who lived in the area now known as the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. He was a preacher and social activist who demanded justice for all people. In his fight for human rights and social justice, he angered powerful political figures and religious leaders in a place that was dominated by the Roman Empire. He was arrested on trumped-up charges and sentenced to death. He was publicly killed to serve as an example to everyone else that they had better just go along with the Romans. The Christian story after Jesus' death goes like this. Jesus died on a Friday afternoon. Friends quickly placed his body in a tomb cut into a rocky hillside and blocked the entrance with a great stone, meaning to come back after the Sabbath to clean the body and give Jesus a proper burial. On Sunday, when two women, Mary Magdalene and Mary, went to the tomb, they felt a great earthquake. They saw an angel come and roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb. The angel told the women not to be afraid, that Jesus was not there because he had risen from the dead. The angel told them to go quickly and tell Jesus' friends that he was alive. On their way back, Jesus met them and said, "Do not be afraid." Many Christians celebrate Easter Sunday to remember this important event and mark the rebirth or resurrection of Jesus. As with our other stories this morning, the story of Jesus told around Easter has an interesting evolution or change through time, as different people told the story and as people in power made decisions to change it for their own purposes. Remember the layers of the onion? The book of Mark was written 70 years after Jesus' death and is now considered to be the oldest of the Gospels. It is a compilation of the oral tradition that already existed about Jesus. In Mark, Jesus is killed and put in the tomb. After the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene and Mary set off to find his body and anoint it, but the body isn't there. Scholars agree that the original book of Mark ends with the women fleeing in terror. The two women don't tell a soul, and Jesus never shows up again. Now imagine if the early Christians had let that story stay in print as first told, ending as it did in a frightened failure of nerve. It took a couple of hundred years, but finally someone did add a new ending to the book of Mark, another layer on the onion. Now, at the end of the story, as it is written in the Christian Bible, Jesus appears again, as if he were not dead. But here's the ending of the story that many Unitarian Universalists think is true. Similar to the earliest writings about Jesus, we think that when several of his friends went to claim his body for burial, it was gone. But that his followers decided that what mattered wasn't the physical body of Jesus. We think that the story as it exists today about Jesus coming back to life is a metaphor, a way to say that this person's message lives on after his death. What truly matters was the life of justice that Jesus lived. What truly matters is what he taught. What truly matters was that Jesus' friends decided that they should carry his work forward into the future so that future generations might live better lives. We don't have to believe in a miraculous resurrection in order to believe in what Jesus taught. And that is the story of Jesus.
So, who's ready for our last story this morning? Our last story this morning is our Unitarian Universalist story. We've heard about the very early beginnings of springtime celebrations and several of the stories that arose to recognize this time of rebirth, renewal, and hope. We heard a little bit about Ishtar and Ostara and Demeter and Persephone and Jesus. And these stories bring us to where we are today, in this time, in this place, that onion with everything layered. And right now, we're the peel. In another 20 years, we'll be one of the layers. We talked about how the name Easter, from Ostara or the east, symbolizes the rising sun, and also the date that we celebrate Easter each year, coming from its early pagan origins, falling sometime between late March and mid-April. It depends on when the first full moon comes after the spring equinox. So that's why, if you ever wondered why our Easter date is different every year, that's why. And we trace the roots of many parts of our Easter traditions back through time. The celebration of the fertility of the earth at this time of year, as symbolized in the eggs and the egg hunts and bunny rabbits and chicks. And we also know that a general symbolic story of the death and rebirth of a goddess or god overcoming the powers of darkness was a very common story in the ancient world. For the story of Jesus that is widely told in our culture this time of year, it's like this. We know that when something as wonderful as the message of love that Jesus spread comes along, in real life, it doesn't die. The message comes back to life. It is reborn. And we know that when goodness and righteousness and love emerge in the midst of humanity, they continue to rise up and come back to us. We know that hope does not die. Hope comes back to life. Just like all the stories this morning, layered like our onion, one on top of the other, hope and rebirth are what we celebrate this time of year. So enjoy this time of spring, this new season of life-affirming and life-giving gifts. And enjoy knowing that we, today, stand in this long, ongoing stream of history, of celebrating and expressing our joy and gratitude for our Mother Earth, and for all the good gifts that she bestows season upon season. Special benediction for Easter Sunday. Out of the earth rises light, rises life, rises spring. May we join with the miracle that is springtime and enter into life with lightness and joy. Out of the Spirit rises faith, rises hope, rises love. May we join with the miracle that is Easter time and enter into life with hope and love. And may the blessings of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. and may love's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore. So be it. Amen, and blessed be.